Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity.
Hello, and welcome to BIM Thoughts. And if you have an acute ear, you know I am not Bill. Bill and Dana are away today, so I'm taking the reins solo to welcome our very special guest, Michael Kilkelly. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well, Carl. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And to not steal Bill's thunder, but he's not here, so I'm gonna define yourself.
That's a good question. So the way I typically do that is I'm an architect, I am a writer, I'm a technologist, and I'm not necessarily those things in that particular order. So depending on the day, I might be wearing my technologist hat or my writer hat or my architect hat. But that's kind of the nutshell.
As a guy that likes hats, I can certainly get behind somebody that has many of them. That's on.
Yeah, I got a closet full.
Nice. Well, and I think that's a good place to start for our discussion today is the fact that you are a man that wears many hats. You're always doing a lot of things. You know, we always see you at conferences and offering workshops, and there's always seems to be Michael out there sharing his knowledge, which is a wonderful thing, and we all appreciate that. But how does one find the time to do it all?
Yeah, that's the challenge. I mean, I tend to, for better or worse, follow my interests, and that leads, in a lot of different directions. And I try to at least have a common theme with them. And I'm interested in design. I'm interested in architecture. Obviously, I've always been interested in technology, and more recently, in the last 5 years or so, getting more and more involved in programming. And so finding like the synergy between all of those things keeps it interesting for me, and there's always like something new to learn. So I try to, as much as I can, keep learning new things, because that's really what drives me. And then also using that as a way, learning things as a way to teach new things, or vice versa, teach new things as a way to learn new things. And that's really what keeps it going. And as a result, I have the different platforms that I participate on or that I've developed. So it's a lot to keep track of. And then certainly things get more attention in one place and they kind of fade out on the other. So, I was active on Twitter for a while, and now I'm never, on Twitter. And so there's only so many hours in the day. So I do try to prioritize, which means some things just kind of get left behind a bit.
Well, I think that's pretty common, and a couple of things to unpack there is the learn through teaching or the learn through sharing. I think that's a great way for everybody to learn, because it's kind of like the mentality of not just leveling yourself up, but leveling up the whole community, right? So something that's popular, something that needs to be adjusting, you want to learn about it, and if you're passionate about it and interested in it, you're going to be more invested in learning. And as you're learning, you sharing that with other people through said platforms. I think that's a great way to approach it, and a great way again to improve the entire community as a whole.
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but I remember early on when I started the ArchSmarter website, there was a phrase of learning out loud, and so, or learning in public, and I really liked that because it provides some incentive, I think, to continue learning, but you're also doing it in a way that you can teach others. So and it keeps you humble because you're making mistakes, and I think that's always good. And I think that helps other learners to see, oh, okay, this person, who may have written this blog post or recorded this video like 2 or 3 years ago, they made this mistake when they were just starting. So this is doable, and look at where they are now. And so I always found that as I'm learning things, it's useful to see people as they're just beginning, and also learning out loud so that you can, kind of see their progression through the material.
Well, and first off, I'm about to drop a bunch of names here, so be prepared for that. But I think that that's a really great thing, and I don't think it's always people always see the value in that. It's
Mm,
one thing to have a nice polished, YouTube video that explains all the steps, but that vulnerability and actually learning, making mistakes, and here with the colleagues at BIM Thoughts, you know. Bill started Dynamo Thoughts a few years ago that he worked with Ian, and then now he's
mm,
doing with Dane. And the idea of knowing nothing about Dynamo, learning in live real time on YouTube, and then Dane has gone on to do Dynamo BIM, the same
mhm.
idea of doing that. And she does a session where she's learning about Python in that environment from
Right. Yep.
San. And again, very new to Dynamo and asking questions, no such thing as a silly question. And others learn that same way. And there's so many times when you're doing a class or session and, somebody's got a question, they don't want to put up their hand.
Right.
But when somebody asks the question, they all go, yeah, yeah, I had that same question. I
Yeah.
thought that. And it really brings that kind of to the forefront and shares that knowledge. So I
Right.
think that's a great mentality. You have to sort of do it that way.
Yeah. It's funny at conferences, I try to make a point of asking a stupid question, from the audience, or at least to make sure I do ask a question, um, and not be, more as a challenge, like a personal challenge, because I'm an introvert. Like I don't always like to, speak out in particularly in large group settings like that, unless I'm on stage, because that's different. But I think that being able to, yeah, put yourself out there and not be try not to worry too much about that, because I agree there is no stupid questions. It's the ones that you don't answer or you don't ask that are the ones that you always get you in the end.
Absolutely. And I think this is going to lead to the next question. And you mentioned it a bit earlier, is sort of all the platforms you're on. The first one I remember from you is what I call ArchSmarter, but you said ArchSmarter, which makes more sense because that's the architecture part. But how do you actually pronounce it?
Arc Smarter.
ArchSmarter. All right. So
Yeah. I was I'm thinking back on when did I come up with that and why did I come up with that? I think it was a snap decision. I needed a URL. Actually, when it started, speaking of learning out loud, it was I think AU like 2012 or something like that. And I was there. I was going to teach a course. Maybe it's 2013. I was doing a session on Revit Macros, and I thought, wow, this would be a great time to launch a blog. And I hadn't actually, written. I didn't have a URL. I didn't have anything there. And so the night before, I, purchased the domain and decided on ArchSmarter with an H, and put up a real simple looking website, because the intent was that I would finish my presentation, say, hey, check out my website. And it would have just, basically a splash page that said coming soon. But it forced me to say it in public that I was going to do this. And then it's like, okay, now I said it, I actually have to do it now. So that came, that I think that ArchSmarter came, the night before my presentation at AU,
no
which may or
pressure at
may
all.
not be, no, I know, may not be the best time to, choose a name for a thing, but so far so good.
And that's fairly common as well with those of us that have done a conference or two in our day, is that you're never done. You're always doing something right up until you step on the
Oh
stage, and even
yeah,
then maybe you have something in your back pocket that you're working on.
right.
So
Yes, because something inevitably is going to go wrong, so
exactly.
yep.
E- exactly. And so the website, the blog, as you call it, that's how I came to know you and get through that. And with the BIMsider website, when it was,
Yep.
I mean, technically it's still up and running, but when I was doing my weekly updates, there's always something cool to come from Michael that I could post in there and come in place. And then you started getting into, as you mentioned, the tools. So your toolbox is one of the things that I've subscribed to for many years, to have access to your little tools, your add-ins for Revit again that come into place. And as far as I know, you're still keeping those up to date.
Yeah. So there's kind of two pieces. There's like Revit macros, and that's really when I started getting into programming, was writing these macros, and that was part of my learning progression for coding, is that I started writing Revit macros first in VB.NET, and then I have since transitioned to C#. But part of it was I'm going to write some tools that I think will be useful, and then I'm just going to put them out there and see if other people like them. And so that was always and still is a sort of free download. I think, I don't know, I need to check how many macros there are because they're all kind of consolidated into a single file. And then I wanted to learn how to create an add-in because that was sort of the next hurdle that I wanted to get over. And so I took the most popular tools from the toolbox and then folded them into an add-in, which is called SmartPack. So that kind of taught me, a lot more about writing add-ins, delivering, as software, even if it's a plugin, but just delivering that, keeping up to date in terms of versions and all sorts of stuff that I didn't think, you didn't really think about when you first started writing macros. So it's been an interesting journey.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the first sessions that I took of yours, and I want to say back when it was RTC, probably 2014,
Yeah. Yep.
when you were teaching one on the macros.
Right.
And it's kind of funny that it's kind of since it died off. They've the ability, and the people that have started teaching about creating add-ins and Dynamo sort of came together at the same time, that people kind of bypass the macros altogether and either
Right.
go into
Yep.
Dynamo and then into add-ins. They kind of sort of bypass that, but there's still some functionality there that I think gets missed if you skip that part.
Yeah, for me, because when I started getting more and more interested in automation, Dynamo, I don't know, if you know, Carl, when it first came out, when the first version, but it was around the time I was interested in automation, but it wasn't robust enough to do that, much with it. And so I said, well, why don't I learn how to write macros? Because I can do that right now, and that'll get me started. In hindsight, I mean, it's a much steeper learning curve to go, from sort of being a Revit operator to writing macros. I think if Dynamo had either started earlier or I had started, my interest blossomed later, I, for sure would have gone right into Dynamo because it's so much more accessible, and it has a learning curve, but I think the learning curve is a little shallower, and then that makes a great starting point. Once you are facile with Dynamo, I think it leads naturally into, okay, what's the next step? Oh, I want to learn how to make an add-in. Okay, how do I do that? But I would agree, yeah, macros really, and I don't really teach macros anymore because they are good because they're accessible and it's easy to get started writing them because you're using the programming environment right inside of Revit. But there are some downsides to that because it's not as stable an environment, and so I've lost countless hours of work because Revit's crashed and I haven't saved my file. It happens, but yeah, I would agree. At some point, I would imagine it's just probably going to get removed. I know they were supporting a bunch of different languages, and then in Revit 2022, they're starting to pare back on the languages that are supported by macros.
Yeah. And that makes sense, especially back in that time, the 2012, 2013, there was some versions of Revit when they were making the big switch that weren't as stable as maybe they could be.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
yeah, I can certainly see that. The other thing that I just want to tip my cap to keep the hat analogy is with the add-ins, your ArchSmarter add-ins. One of the things that you do with yours, you've been able to do with yours, or I don't know how to put it into words, but the idea that if you have a bunch of add-ins, and I always have a bunch of add-ins, that it's smart enough to collapse itself down to just a single, drop-down menu instead of taking up the whole ribbon. That's such a nice feature.
So yeah, I mean, because I always have just a ton of stuff up, and
Yeah.
so just navigating through that is always a challenge. So
Yeah, and that was always one that I back in my Imagine It days, and every year when they were doing their utilities, they'd ask for ideas, and the one that I always came up with, and I understand why it's hard to do, is the ability to turn on and off what you see in your add-ins. So not uninstall them,
yeah,
just turn them off. And I know that what's the name of that one that's floating out there? I believe it's StanTech.
Uh-huh.
that made one it's a little program you run in the command line that allows you to, at startup, just basically deactivate, almost like comment out the add-ins, and
Oh,
so
I
they
gotta
just
check
don't
that
don't
out.
appear.
So they,
And
yeah.
then yeah, and then when you want, you hit the little button, you tell the ones you want to open, and they come back on. And
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
it's the add-in manager.
yes,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure it's the Stantec that came up with it, but it's always on the
Yes.
Revit forum. They're always talking about it.
Yeah, it's funny because I do a lot of add-in development now, and as a result, like my add-in folder is such a mess. So I have, things I'm like testing, or there's things that I'm not using anymore, or I've deleted. So anytime I open up Revit, there's all of these error messages. Like, it's kind of embarrassing because I like, if I have to demonstrate something, I'm like, oh, like I'm clicking through all of these, can't find this DLL, or it's not assigned, certificate, all this stuff happens. I'm like, I need a better way to work. And um, I was thinking too, and it's sort of like the cobbler's kids have no shoes. I'm like, I need a smoother system to work with, all these add-ins that I'm developing. And I've been thinking about that, the add-in manager, and I couldn't remember. So I thanks Carl for the reminder that it was Stantec.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it doesn't come up often. But every once in a while, either on Twitter or in the Revit forum, or it will just sort of pop up because somebody will say, "Hey, how do I do this?" And hey, there's a Standic thing, and it sort of
Yeah,
comes up, and because it's not an ad in itself per se, it always
right.
kind of
It's a
gets.
meta add-in.
Yeah,
It's yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's once we get off this, I will go
So
install.
absolutely. And I guess the next thing, so we talked about ArchSmarter and sort of how that's how I came to know of you. I know one of the other things that came after that was you started doing um, classes, so sort
Yeah,
of online classes where not a lab, but more you go to school for a week, a month, and every Tuesday and Wednesday or whatever it was, you take a session and you can sort of learn through that. And myself personally, a couple of my favorites of yours that I've taken have been the Dynamo for busy people,
mm-hmm.
volume 1 and 2, and
Yep.
the idea behind those was just intriguing that I couldn't pass it up. And of course, always learn something. There's always, no matter how much you know, there's always something else you can learn. But the idea of basically every day or every week, I think they varied from session to session,
They
but
did, yeah.
you would get an email
There's
with
a reason for that, yeah.
you would get an email with, this is a simple problem that we can solve with Dynamo. And then there would be, the graph, there would be an image of the graph, very well noted, commented, essentially like comment your code, and then an explanation of how it worked. And that would kind of be how it goes. So the idea is that you could spend 5 minutes reviewing that. You could deep dive into it if you needed to, but if not, you also had access to the content there and then to get in. And I thought that was a brilliant way of teaching things on a level that, throughout I think each one had 25 sessions or
Yeah,
environments,
exactly, yep.
but there's going to be something for everyone, right?
Yeah,
In that.
that was a lot of fun, and it was a lot of work. I had done I think the first class I did was a Revit Macro class, and it was a video class, and, video classes are great, and it's all online, so, but they take a lot of time to kind of prepare it, and then you've got to record, and, you've got to edit it once you record it. So, as just the editing process takes a long time. So, with Dynamo for busy people, I was curious to try different formats. So I'm like, well, what if I did an email course, and how would you teach it over email? And it was, again, one of those things where I said, okay, I'm going to sort of set up this challenge for myself. I'm going to have to produce a script a day for 5 weeks, basically, and I've got to be able to produce it and make sure that I get it out. And I always thought, I'll start early and I'll build up and I'll get like a week ahead of time, but I never did. So it was always that day. I mean, I had an outline of what each script was going to be, but I would get up early, 4 in the morning or so, and work on that day's script before all my other work started. Uh, and and it was great because it was like, here's a bunch of different problems I need to solve in Dynamo, and I've got a short period of time, and then I have to turn around. I have to get it to work, and then I have to turn around and describe how it works. And so the first session, it was, as you said, it was every day, and that was grueling for me because it was a very intense 5-week period of producing all of those scripts and then annotating them. And I think it was a lot on the students' side to have to get, like, I kept hearing from students, oh, it's too much. I can't keep up. So it wasn't a great way to learn Dynamo, but the intent was to just give you some pieces that you could work with, or if you needed the script, you could go ahead and run it, and then take it apart later and look at it. So the second session was, I decided I'd do 2 a week, so it was over the longer period of time, but a little bit more reasonable. But I always, with these things, I'll be like, oh, here's this idea, I'm going to do it, and I'll see if anybody buys it, and then I'll put the work in, because I'm on the hook at that point. So it's always good to validate the idea, and then put all the effort in to actually get it done. And that was the case with both of those. But I appreciate, Carl, that you like the format. It was fun. When I look back on it, it was fun. In the moment, it was a bit of a slog, to get through it.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine that, especially doing them as they come on a day by day basis. But just the idea behind it, and I'll take one of the examples and include it in the class note, but just the annotation is, you could do a master class in annotation just for that. And when that first one came out, it was before you were even able to before they had installed
Oh
the little
yeah,
camera inside of Dynamo, so it wasn't as easy to get that nice clean PNG from the file as it is now.
right,
Kids don't know
yeah.
how lucky they have it these days, sort of thing. But
Oh, and there was no Monocle wasn't out yet, so like all
yeah.
the auto annotation of all the custom nodes wasn't there, so I had to like manually enter a note. And I was thinking, oh, it'd be great to have a tool that would do all this, and then Monocle came out. I was like, perfect, this is great.
Look
So
at that. It's basically like volume 3 is just going to write itself because all the hard stuff is just done for you now. Automation is king.
yes, yep.
You heard it here first,
There
folks.
you go.
Um, so what are you doing now on the teaching side? What's out there currently, or how can people get access to these, your back catalog?
Yeah, I do. So the URL for all of my courses is learn.archsmarter.com, and that's kind of the course catalog. And there's I have a bunch of courses just that I've done over the years, and I actually have a few courses actually from some other authors like Dan Stein
Hmm.
from BIM Chapters has some courses on there, and then courses I've done in collaboration with other people. It's slowed a bit, and again, partly with going back to this idea of following my interests. And so I had a very intense period where I was doing a lot of courses, and that's slowed a bit. I'm finishing up a course this week, so Dynamo Dojo, and that's a video course. It's actually sort of a hybrid. It's like an in-person course online, and so we meet. It's 5 weeks, and our last session actually is exactly tomorrow. And but over the course of the week, there's kind of a training component, and then I give everybody, because it's a dojo / martial arts theme. I give everybody a challenge for the week that they try to complete on their own. And I like the hybrid where it is online, but we're meeting in person. The sessions are recorded, but then we do a kind of classroom time, and then we have kind of a Q&A time later in the week. And there's also a community component for the class. So there's a lot. The intent is, try to take the best of the online pieces, which is the asynchronous nature of it, but add some kind of community so that there can be near real time communication as needed. So that's been a format that has worked out well, and it gives you enough of a sort of in classroom experience that makes it fun and helps that I learn stuff too from the students. So
Well, and I think that's the key, the asynchronous part. I've done all of the learning, and I've taught many of them throughout the time, and there's nothing quite like the in-classroom experience. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not always a possibility. Back when I was traveling all the days, back when we could do that,
Yeah.
I don't know where I would be from week to week, so I couldn't sign up for, a university continuing ed class
Right.
because I
Yeah.
wouldn't be there. And
Hmm.
so it's something that's where it's asynchronous, where it's a live session. There's people there, the professors teaching every week at a certain time, but you can just log in and watch it. And then there's the ability to have the office hours and such.
Mm.
The other part that's very key to that, as you mentioned, is the challenge or the assignment.
Right.
Learning things through YouTube or whatever, where it's like this is how you do it, is great. But if you're not challenged to actually do something, to
Right.
actually
Yeah.
take what you learn, you lose a lot. And I'm currently in the process of trying to learn JavaScript to get
Mm-hmm.
into some API stuff. And I've done a few
Cool.
classes where it's just you follow, you learn the base, that's great. But then a week later, I go back and do something, I can't remember it. And doing one now where there's you learn something and then there's a project, and the actual typing it out in VS Code and thinking is what cements it, what puts it in place. So I think that's a key component to what you're talking about here with the Dynamo Dojo, along with the awesome name, is that idea that you've got both of those parts. If you can't be sitting in a room somewhere with the people, that's the next best scenario.
Yeah, and that it kind of took me a while to just researching about learning methods and learning strategies and like how can I teach this stuff better, particularly if I'm going to be teaching it online. And that was really a piece because I know for me, if I'm going to learn something, I need a project, I need some context, I need something to do that makes sense to me and that is going to help me. I mean, that's how I got started and got interested in programming. I took in grad school, I took programming classes, and I could never do it. Like it, there was no like it just wasn't applicable to the things that I was interested in or the problems I wanted to solve. And it wasn't until I had some work that I really wanted to automate because it was just horrible and tedious and it was taking me a long, long time until I had that motivation. And I started in AutoCAD writing like VB.net, not even VB.net, sorry, VBA scripts. And I dabbled a little bit in Autolist, but could never get through all those parentheses. But that's what got me going because it was it was contextual, and I was going to be the beneficiary of of my learning because I wasn't going to be spending 8 hours after a project ended to clean everything up. I could write a script that would do it. So that sort of project natured learning, project centric learning, and then definitely being able to do it in a context that I understand. Um, that's always helped me. So I try to as much as I can, and then certainly with courses that I'm have done recently and moving forward, that format is really one that seems to work.
Yeah. And I guess the other point too is that, different generations, different people, different places, they all learn different. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not, I guess we can't say that, in class is the best for everyone. It's the best for me. It's what I enjoy. But the fact that you have all these sort of different offerings, different people can learn different ways and find their stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's just interesting too. Like again, going back to learning by doing, like what is a good, if you're going to teach something over email, like how best can you do that? And um, it, it, there's things to learn from that, just that changing the medium. Um, so that's always kind of fun and interesting.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings us nicely back around to sort of the last point of the all of the wonderful things that came from ArchSmarter, and that's the actual community that you built called Arc. What
Arc,
can you tell us
yeah,
about
yep.
that?
Um, it's funny that started because I was just getting a lot of email, and in part, I send out a weekly email kind of newsletter, and I had been doing a lot of blog posting, and I think I was inspired by you, Carl, because you were sending out your weekly email, um, and I wanted to. I started writing less on my site, and then because my sense was there's a lot of good stuff out there. What if I start curating and looking at what people are doing and kind of put it together into a weekly, here's what I've read this week that's interesting, and sharing that. And I've been doing that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. Although the last couple of weeks I haven't been. Summer's a tough time for me.
Yes, it
The
is.
kids are out of school, and my work schedule is really it's hard to keep it up. So there is an email coming out tomorrow, and even though it's supposed to come out on Thursday, but uh, aside from that, so as part of it, I was sending out these emails every week, and I didn't want it to be just, it felt a bit like me, standing on a soapbox. Here's what I think. And I would start asking questions in the email. Like, I know what I know. I guess I'm an expert in some things, but I don't know everything. And particularly at that time too, I, was doing a lot more consulting work. I wasn't doing a lot of modeling or model management. So I just didn't know. And people would ask me a question and I'd be like, oh, I have absolutely no idea, how best to manage a, 6 building model in Revit. Like, do you break it up or do you, keep it in one, or what's the best approach for that? So I started, posing these questions in my weekly email. And then I would get all these replies back to me, and I felt like I was being a little bit selfish. Like, I was getting all this great, feedback and great comments back, but it was just going into my inbox, which, my inbox is a mess as it is. I'm like, okay, this isn't going to work. And I had just been curious to look at, well, what if I could create a community? And around that time too, there was a lot of software companies were developing community software that was really interesting. That was more than just a bulletin board or a message board, or a forum. And so I started looking at those and thought that could be a good, platform to start building a community that's kind of like, it's not a Facebook group. It's not a Twitter chain or thread or anything like that, but it would be, a private-ish community, but focused on a very particular topic. And so that's where ARC came from. And ARC's been going on for a year and a half or so, and been growing slowly but steadily. But it's a good place to ask questions related to BIM and technology, and because there's a lot of really informed people who hang out there. And so that's been fun to kind of see that grow, and it's one of those things you start, you don't really know where it's going to go, and we'll see if it takes off. So it's kind of an experiment. But I'm, thinking through what's the next step for ARC. What's the best way to grow it and get sort of more people involved. So it's not like it's just my community, it's the community's community.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's
that's
been fun.
that's always the challenge. But again, it's for you and for your brand. It's a nice way to tie everything together, and see people get to know you from the blog, from the conference, from a class, and then they all kind of get thrown into that same ecosystem, and it all kind of, it's like a washing machine, all washed around and mixed together.
Yeah,
So it's that organic growth. I mean, it's nice to overnight have 1,000 followers or 1,000 members, but the organic growth tends to be the more realistic growth, the growth that
right.
sticks around.
Yeah, and it's nice to sort of meet people, even if you're meeting them online. Like, the community gives you a better sense of who they are, and from that, I have met people and talked to people, and we'll look out for each other at conferences and things like that. So it definitely helps. It helps foster in-person communication and sort of friendships, and then it also helps, like, strengthen relationships that you have, that you just don't see that person on a regular basis. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a perfect way to bring our nice Auburn long session, a half hour for those of you that don't listen regularly, session to an end. There's a ton more to talk about. We'll definitely have to have you back on again, because the idea of just consulting in general in the industry is a
yeah,
whole other topic that's, you learn so much, but you're kind of a jack of all trades because you're
right.
not doing one thing all the time. But that would be a great episode to get you
Yeah,
back on
let's do that.
for as
Yep,
well. But
be happy to.
with that, I will say thank you very much, Michael, for
Thank you,
joining
Carl.
us.
Always a pleasure. Hopefully we'll get to do it in person sometime soon.
Absolutely. And next time, I guarantee you there'll be other people on the podcast with us too.
Well, it's always good to talk to you, so I appreciate that.